to vote. To examine this more closely, I am joined by the founders of the new civic engagement website, A Starting Point, actor and producer Chris Evans, Mark Casson, and Joe Chiani. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
I want to start first with you, Chris. Given the fact that you have played most notoriously, famously, and to great box office success, Captain America, did some of that character seep into your veins? How is it that you came around to wanting to do something like this? Was it just an unwavering sense of patriotism? Tell me a little bit about the genesis of this project.
Sure. I mean, it's nice to try and attribute some of it to the parallels of the character. That's not quite the reason, but no, it's always been about just trying to help with the platform I'm lucky enough to have. And for a long time, I've been using Twitter, and you play on that one string and you kind of shout your own opinions, your own narrative. And it's just started to feel like that wasn't having, not that it wasn't having an impact, but I think you can cast a much wider net if you encourage people to actually get involved in the political process themselves. Those are the numbers that are staggering. When you look at how many people vote in general elections, it's just not enough. There's no way that government can work properly if it can't accurately reflect who we are as a nation. So this project was designed to try and create engagement.
You have fairly lofty goals, among them to create an informed, responsible, and empathetic citizenry and to reduce partisanship and promote respectful discourse. From your mouth to God's ears, guys. I wonder, though, in this moment and this week in particular, when our country feels like it has been cleaved in two, do you think the American public wants to come together? It really feels so tribal, the partisanship right now. How do you assess kind of where we are in the context of what you're trying to do with A Starting Point?
I think they do. I think they really do. I mean, it may seem a little misleading if you only go on social media and read some of the comments. Typically, those are the people on the most extreme ends of each party who are the loudest. So it can feel like we're fraying at the edges because the vitriol is at an all-time high. But the truth is, I think the majority of people are a little exhausted with that vitriol, or are looking to find commonality, or looking to make progress. They just aren't always as vocal as the rest.
I totally agree, but I also think that there's not a lot of ways for people to feel engaged without being encouraged to show what they don't agree on. And one of the things we want to do is make a place where there was no reward mechanism for people to galvanize for or against. You could get closer to the electorate without, getting prizes for taking them down because we don't have any message boards or likes or dislikes. And so, we're not here to solve everything, but our experience has been not as negative as people would have thought in terms of the divisiveness, and hopefully our platform will be representative of that.
I respect what you're saying about social media, but I also have spent the last several months, the better part of the last year, traveling around the country to Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. I'm going to North Carolina tomorrow. And I have to tell you, it isn't just social. I mean, people are accosting each other in grocery stores over something like a mask mandate. And what I've seen is the catharsis of anger. It just feels like we are letting it out. And what you're asking people to do is kind of bring it back into a very rational, reasoned conversation. How do you think we got to this point? I mean, I guess, and how do you think we return to civic engagement? It sounds so throwback in a lot of ways, right? But it feels like that part of American society is really atrophied in the course of the last 10 or 20 years.
Sure. I mean, I have my own personal opinions. I do not think we have a leader who has encouraged the perspective of us being one country, one people. I don't think we have a leader who has encouraged, looking for those commonalities. But beyond that, we're still in the internet's infancy. This proliferation of misinformation has only exacerbated, as you said, this kind of tribal perspective, and everyone has retreated to their corners, choosing to read and believe the information that they search out. You know what I mean? So it's only kind of encouraging these kind of us against them mentalities.
I think that people, we're not the answer to all of it. We're not asking people to suddenly change, their nature or asking them to completely operate in a different way. We're just asking them to engage in a simple way and to start somewhere. And a lot of times people go to their corners because they believe that's where they live. And if there was a way to start to hear conversations that may not be what they agree with, but are representative of people's points of view that are your fellow countrymen, perhaps we could create a little bit more empathy and then a more productive dialogue. But we're not answering the whole thing.
When Obama became president, I think it gave rise to a lot of people saying, hey, why is a black man our president? And I think you got some of that racism coming to the surface. And then it gave life to this Trump world that we live in. And as Mark said, I think, and Chris said, the tone at the top has gotten really bad. And it's giving rise to this vitriol like we've never had. Usually tone at the top has been keeping us back to our ideals of what our nation is about. So there's a way to put it back in place. And, I'm grateful for Chris leading this and us trying to bring back that civic engagement, us trying to bring a good tone at the top. And hopefully this election, people will get out there and vote, and instead of protesting the day after.
Chris, we talk about leadership from the top. The president is, of course, the titular head of the Republican Party. There are Republicans in Congress, a lot of whom stand with him, despite whatever their private feelings may be. You went to Capitol Hill to record. You've been the person, for people who do not know, those videos on the website, the person behind the camera is you. Can you tell me a little bit about your experience? Mr. Evans goes to Washington, D.C. What was the reception like? Was it as good or bad? Was the evil as pronounced? Was the good as pronounced as what we see in a Marvel superhero film? Not to belabor the metaphor, but tell me a little bit about how you managed that new landscape.
Sure. It was, every trip to DC was very encouraging, meeting people and I think we all just assume that politics is this machine that doesn't work anymore, doesn't even try to. But when you meet the people involved and you hear their stories and you see that most of them, almost all of them, have kind of had this life of service. It's humbling, it's encouraging, and as I said, I do think things start at the top. Look, politics has always been divisive. It's not like before Trump we were all singing "Kumbaya," but. At least past presidents were able to even give some sort of a perfunctory narrative of us being in this together, where I think that's the opposite of what the guy in charge has done as of late. But to your question, I actually was really encouraged. And again, it was slow going at first, trying to create trust because we were asking politicians to participate without fully knowing what we were asking of them. But over the course of a couple of years, I actually was really inspired by our experience there and the people we spoke with on both sides.
This started because you sort of realized there was a lack of awareness about the specifics of so much of the alphabet soup of politics, DACA, NAFTA, et cetera, et cetera. What have you actually learned in the process?
I learned that I don't know a lot, and that's the problem. It's easy to be an armchair politician. It's easy to sling facts you pick up from a website as if you know the whole story. And, there are so many ripple effects. You change one policy here and then 10 policies down the road, something else shifts. So you really have to have a grasp on how this entire mechanism works to assume a role in politics. And, I think, like I said, a lot of people who choose to have really strong opinions on issues don't always have the whole story, myself included. That's part of the reasons I wanted to do this, because I saw that even I would go into discussions, soaked in conjecture. And that's no way to actually move the ball down the field. That's just a way to try and feel like you're winning or feel like you're just shouting your point. You're not actually listening.
Yeah, soaked in conjecture is kind of like I think all of us are pretty soaked in conjecture right now. Mark, was it hard to convince people to do this, given, you guys are Hollywood guys, you have come from a coast, and there tends to be a healthy amount of skepticism about the bipartisanship or the neutrality of Hollywood, especially in this day and age. Was it easy to get Republicans on board to do this? What was the learning curve like?
Not at first. To Chris's point, people. To be fair to anybody who participated in the site, when we asked people to do this, it didn't exist. So we had to write out a sheet and say, here's what our intent is. And I think there's probably a longer list of people who have been fooled by people in Hollywood than people who haven't. So that was there was, it's a fair pushback. Joe, I went to Joe to help us out with this because Joe had been working on a bipartisan nature through things like the patient safety movement for years. So we basically drafted his credibility, and he trusted us by getting us a couple of people to start with who were people who really believed in having a new way of or at least a way of more productive dissonance, productive dialogue. And then quite honestly, they came to us once we started doing it and they said, a lot of people like you come here and you tell us how to think and you guys asked. And so we just kind of followed that, and through that quickly, we now have more people who want to do this, and we have time to record, which is great.
That's a very good problem to have. To both you and Joe, I guess I wonder, we are now in a zone where basic facts are up for debate, and you guys are trying to present information to the public, but do it responsibly. You have fact checkers that you employ. Can you tell me a little bit about the tension between giving people a platform to espouse their views, but not spreading misinformation, especially depending on what the topic is and who the speaker is?
Yeah, I mean, sure. Starting points are more of our, evergreen glossary. So those are fact checked by section and can go off and re-reference to policy and reference backups based around starting points. Daily points and counterpoints are really held accountable by the fact that these are elected officials. And so they have their own app in which they can upload things in daily points whenever they want. And counterpoints, we are scheduling more and more of our version of a debate. And, we talked a lot, the three of us, about the best way and what was the most responsible way to do these mechanisms. But at the end of the day, these folks are elected to pass laws that will affect all of our lives. And so it's an incumbent upon, we also only give them about a minute or two. So there's only so much trouble they can get into, I think.
The minute's a long time, Mark.
Very much.
But yeah, the first section is fact check. The second and third sections are really, a chance for them to convince their public of their ideals or of the people behind the policy. So, hopefully if people have a difference of opinion about what they're saying, they'll choose to be moved to action. And through our site, there's two actions you can take. One, you can register to vote, of which 10,000 people have registered through our site so far. And you can contact that congressperson, that government official, of which over 50,000 people have contacted their representatives through our site so far as well.
Joe, how did these two guys rope you into this? And what is your level of optimism? I can assume, they're very charismatic. I'll give them that. But what is your end goal here in all of this? How do you know that you've been successful?
Well, first of all, I think 2016 was a wake-up call that we don't get enough young people voting, and we needed to do more about that. And I went to Mark and say, Mark, I got 7,000 followers. Chris and you guys have millions of followers. Why don't you guys do more to try to get these people to get out and vote and get involved? So while I was looking for a mechanism, that's when Mark came to me and said, Chris has got really this cool idea of how we can do this in a way to get young people to feel like they can get engaged, they can learn, and they can get involved. To Chris's and Mark's credit, they worked really hard at it. It wasn't just, showing up when it was time to get credits. It was doing all the work. Chris was in there not only interviewing people early morning till 5, 6, but then went up and met with the engineers who were developing it and would, be involved in the layout of every little detail. So, it's really good to see somebody like these two, that especially Chris, that has everything going for him, caring about other people. So many people are out there caring about their own tribe. And it's really good to see someone like Chris care about all the tribes and want to make this thing work better for everybody. So I was in.
And two things that, one to Joe's credit, Joe would make us, anytime we would sort of think about what we were doing, what this was about, Joe would say, all right, what are our guiding principles? So when you say who's the most positive person in terms of what's possible, it's Joe. Joe actually is the one that we think of in terms of what's the most positive way to move this forward. The other big thing that I can tell you that nobody else knows, here's breaking news about Chris Evans, is that he's phenomenal at spreadsheets. So people would say what's the most surprising part of this?
I thought you were going to say something else, but okay.
No, this would actually be great at actually going through the spreadsheets and being able to make sure that the questions were ordered properly. And this is really a grassroots movement.
A fallback career is what you're saying in case the whole movie thing doesn't work out. It's good to know. America was worried about what would happen to Chris Evans.
I know, he's going to be a master of group backs.
Chris, 58% of the country voted in 2016. We are sitting on the precipice of, we always say it's the most consequential election of our lifetimes, but it really actually factually might be that. What is your level of optimism, and where is your head at about, as far as American political, as far as where the country is at politically, I should say?
Yeah. I think actually we even said earlier that I think everyone always feels like things are at their most bleak. We always forget that things like this have happened before. So even though it's easy to be a little cynical when you kind of focus in on the political landscape, I'm trying to not let that deter my efforts and focus on this website, because I really feel like the goal here is to create participation and engagement and hope that there is more good in the world than there is bad. But oddly enough, in the throes of this political website, I've never been less involved in what's actually happening in the political landscape, because it almost is a little depressing.
It is a starting point, both metaphorically and quite literally. The site, again, is a starting point. Everyone should log on. It actually is it's a very important thing you guys are doing. It is not often that we talk about the sort of the heart of these matters, and that's what you guys are trying to do. So thank you for your work. Thank you for your time. Chris Evans, Mark Casson, and Joe Kiani, thank you for joining